Now, Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon.
Hello there, it's Ian Anderson here. How are you?
Good morning, good morning, good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Well, let's get right into this. Brand new record, first new material in over 18 years, coming out on January 28th. The Zealot Game, available now for pre-order wherever music is sold. Welcome to the show, for the first time ever, Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. Mr. Anderson, great to see you.
Yes.
Well, nice to see you too. I'm just going to mute the telephone sitting next to me just in case somebody calls in.
In case the Matrix calls in.
In case the what?
In case the Matrix calls in. Have you ever seen the movie The Matrix? The main character.
I'm not really a movie watcher, so it means nothing to me. Anyway,
Keanu Reeves. He's Mr. Anderson.
I see. Right.
And to get into the Matrix, the phone rings. So you pick up the phone, and you get pulled into the Matrix.
Wow, how utterly fascinating. Remind me to delete Netflix from my account. Okay, fire away. First question. What do you got?
Yeah.
Mitch, go ahead.
Well, talk to me about putting together this album, because it is the first material in 18 years. You can, of course, go out as Jethro Tull and tour successfully and play all the stuff from Aqualung and Crest of the Knave and all these albums. Talk to me about the urge to say, you know what? I need to have something fresh and something current.
Well, the guys in the band who performed on this, these are musicians who've been with me for an average of about 15 years, and they've done hundreds and hundreds of concerts as Jethro Tull performing live, but they've never actually been on an album simply called Jethro Tull. So I thought it would honor their long-standing commitment to make this album a band Jethro Tull album, and that was my intention when I started work on it back in at 9 a.m. on January the 1st of 2017. I started work writing, and we recorded 7 tracks, I think, fairly early on during the year. I completed 4 of them later that year, and kept, intending to come back to it, but with all the pressure of touring and the limited number of days between tours that were there for the band and me to have some kind of a home life, it kept getting put off. And then, of course, the pandemic came along, which meant it was unwise for us to get together in the studio. And at the beginning of this year, I gave up hope that we would be able to record the last 5 songs, which I'd written back in 2017. So I decided to record them myself, and they were therefore rather more acoustic offerings. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because in a way, the contrast and the dynamic range of the album is probably a better end result. It reminds me a little bit of the Aqualung album, which had a series of heavy rock songs, but then, a bunch of quite light singer-songwriter acoustic pieces as well.
When you say that you want to get the new members, honor them by putting them on an album and stuff, do you then therefore write to their strength and write to what they're doing? Or do you say, okay, guys, you've got to somehow figure out how we sounded on Thick as a Brick and give me that Jethro Tull sound? Where are you going musically with it?
Well, I don't really ever have to tell them that. They are experienced and wise old birds, and they understand that with classic material from certain periods of the early days of Jethro Tull, that they have to retain the key elements of those performances in terms of the musical arrangement. But of course, there's a lot of improvising goes on in Jethro Tull music, past, present, and doubtless future. So it gives them the opportunity to put their own fine detail into the parts that they play. Right. And on this particular album, I think they were given, probably by end of February, I think I was able to give, February 2017, I was able to give them all the lyrics, all the chord sheets, make some simple demos that I could send them. So they had all the material to begin to prepare the music ready for 5 days of rehearsal that we did in March, followed by 4 days of recording to do the first 7 tracks. So it was, it was done that way, in the way I think it's always best to work, if you can do that playing live in the studio rather than it becoming too artificial with performing in bits and stitching it all together later. It's satisfying to be able to perform live and hear all the key elements. I mean, I sang along and played flute in the recording from another booth, but for practical reasons, there's always a bit of
the isolation,
and you tend to do it again, to do the master, which I did in isolation. As far as my flute and vocals or a bit of acoustic guitar was concerned, but working as much as possible to make it feel live is, to me, I think, an important part of making a record. I mean, our guitarist Florian, he actually played those guitar solos live in the studio as part of the recording, with everybody else there. They weren't overdubbed later. He played his solos live.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a lost art form these days, because everybody's just doing the overdubs and, send the drum session to one guitarist and then the bass player puts it off, and they're all in different studios. But the fact that you did it all together.
We've done our share of that. I mean, Bob Ezrin told me that he'd recorded an entire Pink Floyd album that way back in the days of recording The Wall. He said that there was never more than one member of the band in the studio at any one time. He may have been exaggerating, but that's what he told me. And I can remember recording Locomotive Breath on the Aqualung album. We tried playing it together. It just wasn't clicking. It didn't gel. So I went out and played hi-hat for 4 minutes. I was a hi-hat and a bass drum, I think I played in the studio.
Was Matt Lang producing? Jeez.
No, I was producing, but I went out and did that, and then I borrowed Martin Barr's electric guitar and played the basic rhythm part and some of the solo lines, and then Clive Bunker, the drummer, went out and played cymbals and some tom-toms, and John Evans added some piano. So that was constructed in a very artificial way. And yet, oddly, the end result does sound like a band playing together. It worked, but it wasn't the way I intended to record the song. It just had to be done that way because we somehow weren't getting the feel, the metronomic clickety-clack sort of mechanical nature of the song wasn't really coming when we tried to play it live, and so it had to be done another way.
So the way you record it this way, is it more for the sense of catching a vibe and making sure that vibe gets on the record, or do you look at it down the road like, we need to record stuff that we'll be able to play live, so if we can't play it live here, well then there's no purpose. So is it with the live show in mind, or is it with vibe in mind?
Well, it's definitely both of those things. And I think to record music in a way that you're confident when you're doing it, that you can recreate this at any time, anywhere, as long as you've got your instruments with you, that is reassuring. But there is another factor, apart from the vibe and the being able to replicate it live, that comes to mind, which is not wasting time. Is to be economic with time. And so when you actually get in the studio and you play it, that we could do 7 songs with 5 days rehearsal and 4 days of recording, that's getting a result pretty quickly. So that was certainly another part of it. I like to work quickly. I have always worked from the days of analog tape through to the latest
Pro Tools,
updated versions of the recording software I use, for digital recording today. I work with what's referred to as destructive recording techniques. In other words, when I record something and I want to replace a bit of it, I don't do another track and then compile it later. I destroy, I delete the section that I'm recording over, because I don't want to have to make choices. I know full well if I've sung the wrong word, or it's a bit out of tune, or the diction's not great, or the flute playing has got a mistake in it or something. I instantly hear it. There's no point in keeping it and fiddling with it later. I go back in there and bang, replace it with something else. So that's called destructive recording. I don't keep the rubbish.
Yeah.
Get rid of it forever.
But where's your deluxe box set?
Back. That to me is making decisions as I go, and I like to do that. I really don't like to have to compile elements of one take and another take, and very rarely do I use that way of recording something. Sometimes in the early stages of recording it's good as a reference point, but when you come to be doing it for real and you're looking for that best performance, that master, there's just no point in keeping the rubbish. Get rid of it.
Do we overthink music now?
I have no idea. I don't know if you do. I certainly could be well accused of going into too much detail, and perhaps to consider things perhaps in too much of an intellectual point of view, but that I find that enjoyable. I like to have a reason to do something and to do it in a certain way. So I tend to think in a quite a detailed way about what I'm doing, but arguably it's not the way other people will listen to music. They listen in a more immediate, here and now sense, and I think that's appropriate that they do that. And I had second thoughts about giving all the information about the recording process and the background to writing the songs and the biblical references that I had sitting in the periphery of my view when I was working on the lyrics. That maybe it's best not to share that with people. Maybe just let them hear the end result and think for themselves as to what it might mean or not mean. But I know there are some fans who really do want to have the detail. They do want to know how did this come about? What was the process of writing songs? Is it a concept album? Is it something that has more of as I say, more of an intellectual standpoint than I decided, well, I discussed it actually with the record company, whether or not we should include all of that in the artwork booklet or just leave it out. And they felt, no, let's put it in because it's part of the process of making the record, and some people enjoy finding that out. Most, however, I don't think they really care, but that's fine.
To go back to your point on the destructive recording techniques, you're the second artist that's ever told me about that. I interviewed Bryan Adams, and we were talking about working with Mutt Lange on the Waking Up the Neighbors album, and he told me that they just couldn't figure out this entire verse section. And Mutt was like, okay, well, hold on a second. And he went in and he completely cleared off all the guitars, all the bass, all the keyboards, all the vocals, just left the drum track on there. And Bryan was like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, we didn't like it, so let's write something new. And I thought that was really interesting because a lot of artists are just so precious with what they record and what they write. And the fact that you just go in and just completely delete it, erase it, I mean, that says a lot about how confident you are.
Well, it's again, it's an expedient. It's so much quicker to do because if you at the end of 3 hours, you've got a master vocal and a master flute, perhaps from, concentrated effort, then it's done. It's all finished. I hate to come back on another day and decide to replace something or to do it again. I really like to try and get to where I'm headed as fast as I possibly can. I've always liked to work fast, both in the writing process, the arranging process, the recording process. I like to see an end result. And I'm very uncomfortable if I spend more than 3 or 4 hours in terms of studio work. I don't have the energy for prolonged sessions, and I don't really like to work late at night. And when it comes to writing music and arranging music, I'm an early riser. I'm usually in the office by 6:30, and I do a certain amount of office work for a couple of hours, take a break, then come back to be perhaps doing more creative stuff if I'm writing new material. Take a break at lunchtime, go back and maybe refine it a bit in the afternoon, and hopefully after a couple of days, I've got a complete song with lyrics and an arrangement, and that is about as much time as I want to spend on that process, because the gratification comes from achieving an end result within a tangible period of time. And I don't like to drag it out. And so a lot of people have imagined that it's taken me 4 years of noodling to get to finalizing a new album, but the total number of hours spent on writing and recording is about the same as it always has been.
Right. But look, I mean, you even said you went into the studio and just recorded a hi-hat and a kick drum at a time and layered some sounds on. So you did some experimentation in the studio when it came to recording.
Well, back in the early days of analog recording, everything was experimentation. It was, we didn't have the methodology. When George Martin started working with a couple of 2-track ferrographs in Abbey Road Studios, and then went on to record 4-track, which is what they did in the early recordings. It was the first use of multi-tracking, and you could bounce tracks down and create another free track to do something else with. But it was a very limiting thing, and you had to make decisions as you went. That's how George Martin worked. He only had the facilities of 4-track recording. He had to make decisions about the balance between bass and drums, and that was forever fixed, because to free up another track for vocals, you had to bounce tracks together, and that was it. It done and dusted. There was no going back. So when George was doing that stuff, and then it went on to 8-track recording and 16-track recording and 24-track recording and 48-track recording, it was a revolutionary period of time that first recordings we ever made in a studio were actually 4-track, but the first Jethro Tull album was an 8-track album, and we went on to within, I suppose, 3 or 4 years, we had seen the advent of 24-track recording, and then people would often gang up 2 machines, so you had 48 tracks, so the machines were running in sync together. Then that was an endless possibility.
Yeah, let me just.
But I don't think it necessarily was a good thing, because in a way, recording on 16-track, for example, again, you had to make some decisions. You had to make some pretty firm commitments to what you were doing, and that was part of the evolution of analog recording. When digital technology came along, it was also limited to a number of tracks. These days, as long as you've got fast enough processing speed on your computer and a big enough hard disk, well, you need a lot of RAM in order to indulge yourself. But you can record
2 terabytes
tracks
easily.
You could put it on 100 tracks if you wanted to.
Let me just ask you real quick about the early days of the band. You and Terry Ellis produced pretty much a lot of the sort of early records. Talk to me about not handing the reins completely over to Terry and being part of it. And how did you get the record company to allow the band member to be the producer? And why was it important to have your input and not just sort of turn the project over and say, okay, Terry, you do what you do, we do what we do?
I think we have to remember that Terry Ellis was the band's manager.
True.
He is listed as a producer on a couple of early records because he sometimes popped in the studio to see how things were going on and made a few comments or what he thought were helpful suggestions. And but that's I think he misunderstood the term as to what a producer does. I think he was thinking more in terms of producer being like a movie producer, the person who is organizing things and perhaps funding it in the case of the record company, picking up the tab for studio recording, etc. But in terms of the technicalities of being a record producer, that's a much more creative role. And first of all, you've got to have a pretty good musical brain to be a record producer, and you've also got to have a good technical understanding of the recording process. And I was in the studio all the time, learning that side of things as I went along. So I was I wasn't engineering the albums back then. We worked with a studio engineer, but I was learning as much as I could about recording technology and how to get the end result that we were trying to find. So that was the role. Terry, on the other hand, being the band's manager, was a person who gave me a lot of support and encouragement.
Right.
And there was never really any question about the record company, because his role as a manager then became, as Chrysalis Records got formed from 1969 onwards, we were effectively the first band to be signed to the new Chrysalis record label. That I had all the freedom that I wanted. They never really tried to influence the way the records were going, and if the records were getting made and selling lots of copies, why would you want to interfere?
Right.
So,
Well, let me ask you about that. Why not bring in a set of ears? Why not bring in a Jack Richardson or a Bob Ezrin or a Roy Thomas Baker? Why not have that extra set of ears?
Well, we did try that a few times.
Right.
A couple of times at my suggestion. In fact, I sat down for a meeting. I think it was after the Aqualung album. I was about to start work on Thick as a Brick, and I had a meeting with I sat down first of all to talk to our managers about the opportunities that might exist if we were to work with a record producer. Might that sort of open horizons and free me to some extent from being in the studio all the time? I could just then be a musician, an arranger, a songwriter, instead of taking on the full mantle of everything. But they suggested that I go and talk to George Martin. And I sat down with George Martin, and we'd already sent him a copy of the Aqualung album, and he asked me the question, well, why do you want to have a producer? And I said, well, I suppose because of someone with objectivity who can bring another creative standpoint to everything, and find a way to make the music happen that perhaps I couldn't do on my own. And he said, well, how many copies of Aqualung have you sold, and how did you make the record, and blah, 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 blah. And at the end of it, he said, look, if I were you, I would just carry on doing what you're doing, because I don't think you really need to have a producer. It's just that you perhaps feel a little insecure, he said, but the end result is such that, why bother? And and I took that away with me and thought, yes, I think he's probably right. As if we've managed to shift a lot of records and please a lot of people, then maybe I should carry on working that way. And I then embarked upon Thick as a Brick, which I think was possibly a moment when the record company did have doubts that I retained all of my youthful marbles, and that I wasn't embarked on some suicide mission in professional terms. They didn't really like the record, the album cover, the album artwork, and that bothered them a bit as well. But they ultimately said, okay, if that's what you want to do, then we'll do it. And of course, the record was, it was surprisingly, given it was a high level of parody on the concept album genre, and having a 16-page newspaper as an album cover was a bit revolutionary. But it all worked, and at the end of it all, it was one of those occasions when they scratched their heads a bit and thought, well, yeah, he really does know what he's doing.
Right.
But it was just a commitment. There are other albums where I left it to either Terry or record company artwork people to come up with album artwork, and on 2 occasions I've worked with other producers who, well, we had somebody come in at the beginning of recording the Broadsword and the Beast album that was suggested, and he lasted a week before he was removed and dispatched back to Los Angeles along with his drug dealer and cocaine stash.
Nice.
So he wasn't a person that we could get on with or work with, because we don't do drugs. We're not
Right.
rock and roll in that way. We're never have enjoyed being around that scenario, and the atmosphere that was created in the studio was not conducive to making a record. So he was sent home, and because we had a bunch of stuff, and I thought, well, I don't want to give up on the idea of having a record producer. I looked in the yellow pages under R for record producer, and a name popped out at me from the yellow pages, which was Paul Samuel Smith, whose name I recognized from being the bass player with the Yardbirds, but also having produced some stuff for Cat Stevens, whose work I admired. So I called the number in the yellow pages, and Paul Samuel Smith said, hello. And I don't think he was particularly familiar with Jethro Tull, but we sent him a bunch of demos that we'd made, and the some of the work that we had been doing with the previous producer, and he was able to start fairly soon. So we got him into. He worked on some of the songs while we were still recording them, but mostly by the time he was sitting in that seat, most of the work was done. He was more involved in the mixing, and I was happy to let him and our engineer Robin Black sit together and essentially mix the album with little input from me, that was okay. So it wasn't one of our most successful albums in the USA by any means, but it was very successful in Europe, and in Germany it was the biggest selling Jethro Tull record ever. So it did okay. And I also worked with a pop producer when the record company wanted to re-record a song that I did on Songs from the Wood as a Christmas single. They wanted to try and make it a little bit more catchy, a bit more radio friendly. And so I said, well, okay, I'll give it a go. And they wheeled in a pop record producer who we worked with. The band didn't get on with him at all. And I said, look, you've got to do your best, to do what he says. We should try to let him have that authority and see what expertise he can bring to bear. So they gritted their teeth and did what he told them to do. And the end result, I don't think any of us particularly liked. So I sent to the record company, look, what I want you to do is to play the other guy's mix and play my album mix of the song. Really quite a different arrangement too. Mm-hmm. I said, play it to the guys in the mailroom, play it to the cleaning lady. This is not a decision for A&R or the bosses of the record company. Play it to real people who just see what their reaction is. So they agreed to do that, and then they phoned me and said, right, well, we're going to go with your original version because people for whatever reason, found it more engaging than the other version, which never actually. No one ever heard that other version until recently. I think I had agreed the record company could release that alternative version, which still existed.
And I think it just goes to show, I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes the gatekeeper should just let the talent do what the talent does best, and that's be the talent.
Yeah, well, it depends. It depends on who it is. Some people have a method of working and take it seriously and show up for work every day at the right time and don't need to be assisted out of bed or into the studio or fed with drugs, booze, and saucy ladies. They can be relied upon to get on with the job and complete it, to schedule. And I am one of those. Therefore, the record company would find it pretty easy to work with me, as indeed the record company has released the Zealot Gene. They find it, I'm sure they find me rather unusual in as much as I can hold a conversation in something approximating to English grammar, and I can get the job done and do what I say I'm going to do. And they seem to appreciate they're dealing directly with me, not with a manager or a record producer or somebody else that's somewhere between the artist and the record company. They're dealing directly with me. I don't have a lawyer.
Right.
I have read and signed enough record contracts in my time. I do not need to engage the services of a lawyer in order to negotiate and finally sign.
Kind of know what's going on.
The long version copy of a record contract is stuff I've been doing for 50 odd years. I should know how to do it by now.
You know the definition of recoupment. So, let me ask you this: we got a little bit more time, and we're going to run out. But as a Canadian, back in the '80s, you worked with Honeymoon Suite on a song called "All Along You Knew," which I love. It's so and your part is what makes the song. How did that combination come together? That you sort of a Canadian pop band and Jethro Tull's Ian Anderson combined to create a fantastic song?
Well, it's not the only Canadian band. I also played on a track by Men Without Hats.
Yes, on the Pop Goes the World album.
Yeah, that's right. It's a song called "On Tuesday."
Right.
And but in the case of the Honeymoon Suite, they were I think they were on the same agency roster as we were, and so it was suggested they might be a support act for Jethro Tull on a tour of North America. So that's how we got to know them. And then they asked me if I would play on a track, so I said yes, and I did it, and that was the end of it. I mean, they probably sent, a rough mix of a track, and I recorded my bit in the studio and sent it back to them. These days, I barely have to get out of bed, because in the digital age, I can sit at my office desk and record, my contribution to somebody else's record.
We transfer it over.
That with Men Without Hats, it was because I think the main man Ivan had heard somewhere on the grapevine that how much I had enjoyed their song "The Safety Dance" when it was aired on British television as a video, and I found it a very refreshing sort of fun piece of work that was almost kind of a post-hippie extravaganza as a video, and it was in sharp contrast to the synth pop of the time.
Yep.
Although his sensitivity for working with electro pop and traditional ideas and carefully thought through vocals and lyrics, it was a good balance. Sometimes there are pop songs I've played on jazz records, I've played on classical affiliations with people, I've done all sorts of things, and I'm quite content to contribute to somebody's work if it's different to what I do. There's more of a challenge, if you're playing on somebody else's record, to try and get inside their head and understand their music, because it's not the music I do. It's not my happy hunting ground in terms of musical style or detail. So it's a good challenge to work with other people. Next week I have to work with a symphony orchestra and a choir in the Vatican Christmas concerts in Rome. Wow. So
that'll be fun.
I shall be, well, it might be fun, but I will be well outside of my comfort zone, but it is a challenge. It'll be a challenge also not to contract COVID while I'm there, but I shall do my best. Anyway, it'd be very nice to talk to you guys, and thanks for your support and interest in the new record, and have a Merry Christmas and live to prosper in the new year.
Yes, right back absolutely. At you. Brand new record, January 28th. You can pre-order it now. Thanks a lot. It was so great to chat.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Later. Bye.
All right, great.